As we're inching up on the end of Ongo, I wanted to invite some reflection on how we've worked with the theme for this period of practice, the bardo, the in-between states that are not quite here or there. As some of you know, I just came back from a few weeks in Maui working with people who had been living in Lahaina at the time of the fire there. And it was a town of between 11,000 and 13,000 people that's literally gone. There's no buildings. There's barely remains of one or two places. The ground there is very toxic. They needed to spray an adhesive over the ashes so they wouldn't blow in the wind or enter the water. They're saying that it might be 5 years before there could be any plumbing or waterworks installed. So there's not going to be any construction anytime soon. And a place that already had a housing shortage. And this was the state these folks were in. Their past was physically gone. They had no idea where they were going to be. They were living in hotels. The Red Cross had contracts with some hotels that weren't being renewed. People were being moved around a lot. I arrived there 101 days after the fire, and some people had been moved 8 times since then. And they were hanging in this space, not by choice, not by their design in any way, but it really brought this Ongo theme to life for me. And how do we hang out with not knowing what's next, having what was before not necessarily matter. A lot of folks, this was one of the only what's considered affordable places to live on the island, and it really was a working class community. A lot of hospitality and restaurant workers, a lot of self-employed people that worked in their home, had never declared their business in any way, weren't insured. They shaped surfboards, they made costumes for theater companies. They had no tools to start over with. And they were just in this space, and being in a hotel with them that was while they were all neighbors of each other in the same town, they weren't people that would choose to be in the same building as each other. Any strata of socioeconomic levels was blasted apart, and people who had been unhomed before the fire, people that might have owned 3 or 4 houses and a successful business, were in hotel rooms next to each other. Nobody knew what was going to be happening next. When some housing did appear, it was often on the other side of the island, and people were told, this is your place to go to now, regardless of whether they had jobs or kids in school on the west side of the island. And just being surrounded by people who knew they didn't know what was coming was really interesting to be in the midst of, while intentionally throwing myself into the practice of the bardo through choosing to go there to work with them, and also being in the Sangha and part of the Sangha period. So I wanted to talk about those in-between unknowing places. It's said that Dharma talks can be dark to the mind, but luminous to the heart. So I invite you to hold the words that you're about to hear very loosely. Let them enter and dissolve or depart freely without grasping, analysis, or pushing away. Who am I right now? Who are you? Where am I in relation to space, time, intention? Where are you? Am I okay? Are you? All of us okay? Right now? Do we need to do something more to be okay? Do you need to stop doing something to be okay? How do you know? What is okay? Is that thing in the oven done? The timer just went off. Are we good enough at the things we do? Have you learned enough? Earned enough? Will you ever? Where do you place yourself on the grand timeline of your life? Are any expectations reasonable? It's unnerving, unsettling, isn't it all? Does it have to be? I once saw somebody at a retreat wearing a t-shirt that had the words, "Worrying is not preparation," printed on the back. We think the past can be known, but that depends on the clarity of perceptions, and we all have our filters. What was on your mind the second before you saw something happen, heard those words? Internal circumstances crashing into external occurrences. Can you really trust that? It's been said that the only time we have agency can have an impact on our lives and the world is in the present moments. That immeasurable time wedged between past and future, barely perceptible, yet it's where we exist. As an artist, I'm always confronting the liminal, not knowing if one painting or a whole series is ever complete, if I've exhausted an idea or just grown bored or impatient, not knowing if it's really time to go on to the next new thing or if I'm just seeking novelty. Did I just get scared? Was I too close to home for my own comfort to stay longer? Am I too attached to an idea or a theme? How does a poet know when they should nix a stanza or change one word? What leads a songwriter to add another verse? How do we exist and function not knowing? And is there an alternative to that? The bardo states between living and dying, between befores and afters of relationships, jobs, hobbies, koans, kisses. How do we breathe life into the unknown so it doesn't collapse, explode, steal our souls, create the delusion of division? How do we be in the moment with our fears, hopes, accomplishments, and regrets? How do I do this? How do you? A few weeks before Ongo began, I went into the studio and I had finished a big commission piece a month or two before, and I didn't know what was next. And there's always that kind of in between time that used to terrify me, and now I just kind of got used to. I was remembering my time as Shuso during another Ongo a couple of years ago, and the big watercolor paintings I made to help visualize the koan I was working with that would become the topic of my talk at the end of the Shuso Hosen and material for the Dharma combat that would follow it. One of the paintings is hanging over the piano at Willow Farm, and the other two had been rolled up and stuffed in tubes high on a storage shelf for years. I unfurled them and began cutting them into smaller pieces. I stared at them for a day or two, asking what they'd like to become. And becoming was the answer. Each section cut from a big painting became my take on visually exploring and describing that liminal bardo space. Onto the background of the old paintings, I drew wispy, loosely defined lotus flowers, unrooted, almost transparent. The past paintings dissolving beneath, the future unformed and unknowable. A couple of days later, I was excited when our teacher, Gakyo Sensei, announced what our theme was going to be for this Ongo, and that we'd be working with these bardos, these in-between spaces. It just felt right when I heard that. Those brief moments I love when I can hear the harmonies within the frequencies of the universe. And it feels like for a fraction of a second anyway, that things fit together and click in place and then float off. Michael Yukon Grody, whose name some of you have heard chanted in the mornings in the dedication on Thursdays, is a friend of mine from my days at Zen Mountain Monastery in upstate New York. He's a monk there, and while Daido Roshi's Dharma and determination were the mortar and gears of the place, to me, Yukon singing while tending the bees and the vegetables and the flowers were the heartbeat. Late this summer, he learned that there was a tumor in his brain that couldn't be completely removed. And while I was preparing this talk last night, I learned that he entered hospice care. The wind out my window was roaring. The light of day was fading. And by the next morning, the big tree leaning down by my driveway might fall down. I didn't know. This is also the harmony within the frequencies of the universe. Things fleetingly fitting together and clicking in place, ceaselessly dissolving and becoming. Who am I right now? Who are you? Where am I in relation to space, to time, intention? Where are you? In our discussion after we sit, I hope you'll be willing to share a little about how you've engaged with this with these kind of questions and what's been happening in your practice and your life. How has this theme come alive for you or not? What has it been like to choose not knowing? Acceptance? If you're someone with a tendency who wants to know what's going on or to have things in a certain way, what did you do when those habitual dualistic patterns arose? And if you're someone like me, a little more oriented to spaciousness, chaos, emptiness, what did you learn or see during this time? With less than a week to go in our Ongo period for this year, where do you find yourself? Are you evaluating how you participated? Are you congratulating or reprimanding yourself? Or are you opening to something bigger, feeling into that which is less definable? Where are you now?